The summer heat was brutal that afternoon, the kind of heat that makes the air shimmer above the asphalt and turns every metal surface into a stovetop. Inside the small auto repair shop on Miller Street, a young mechanic named Jake wiped the sweat from his forehead with an oil-stained rag and glanced at the clock. Almost 3 in the afternoon, and he still had 2 more cars to finish before closing time. Jake had been working at Miller's Auto Repair for nearly 4 years now. At 28, he'd become the best mechanic in the shop, though that didn't mean much when it came to his paycheck.
His boss, Mr. Peterson, ran a tight ship and an even tighter budget.
But Jake didn't mind the hard work. There was something satisfying about fixing things, about taking something broken and making it run smooth again. He was just sliding back under a Honda Civic when he heard the unmistakable sound of an engine in serious trouble. The wheezing, clanking noise grew louder as a beaten-up old sedan rolled into the parking lot, trailing a thick cloud of white smoke. The car barely made it past the bay doors before it shuddered and died with a final, pitiful cough. Jake rolled out from under the Honda and stood up, squinting against the bright sunlight streaming through the open garage door. The driver's side door of the old sedan creaked open, and an elderly man stepped out slowly, one hand pressed against his lower back like standing up hurt. He looked to be in his 70s, maybe older, with thin white hair and clothes that had seen better days. His shirt was faded and patched at the elbows, and his shoes were worn down at the heels. "Please tell me you can help me," the old man said, his voice shaky with worry. "My car just gave up on me." Jake walked over, already mentally running through the possibilities based on the smoke he'd seen. "Let's take a look, sir. When did it start acting up?" "About 20 miles back. Started overheating, then making these terrible noises." The old man looked at his car like it had personally betrayed him. "I was praying it would just make it here." "Pop the hood for me," Jake said, grabbing a flashlight from his toolbox. As the old man reached inside to pull the hood release, Jake noticed his hands were trembling. Not just from age, either. This was the kind of shaking that came from real stress, real fear about what came next. The hood lifted with a rusty groan, and Jake immediately saw the problem. Actually, he saw multiple problems. Coolant was everywhere. The radiator hose had a split in it, and when he checked the water pump, he could feel the excessive play in the bearing. The timing belt looked like it could snap any second. This car was held together by hope and not much else. "How bad is it?" the old man asked quietly. Jake straightened up and wiped his hands on his rag. He hated this part. "Well, sir, you need a new water pump, timing belt, and radiator hose at minimum. The radiator itself might need replacing too, but I'd have to check that more carefully." "How much are we talking?" "For parts and labor, probably around $800 or $900. The old man's face went pale. He actually swayed a little on his feet, and Jake reached out to steady him. "You okay, sir? Why don't you sit down in the waiting area? I'll get you some water." Inside the small waiting room with its torn vinyl chairs and outdated magazines, the old man sat down heavily and accepted the bottle of water Jake brought him. He took a long drink, then looked up with eyes that were suddenly wet. "I don't have that kind of money," he said simply. "I'm on a fixed income, and most of that goes to my wife's medications. She's got diabetes and heart problems, and the prescriptions cost more every year." Jake pulled up a chair and sat down. "Where were you headed?" "St. Luke's Medical Center, about 200 miles from here. My wife has an appointment with a specialist tomorrow morning. We've been waiting 4 months to see this doctor. If we miss it, we'll have to wait another 4 months, and I don't know if—" His voice broke. "I don't know if she has that kind of time." Before Jake could respond, his boss, Mr. Peterson, walked in from the back office. He was a stocky man in his 50s with permanently grease-stained fingernails and a calculator where his heart should be. He'd clearly overheard at least part of the conversation. "Jake, can I talk to you for a minute?" Mr. Peterson jerked his head toward the garage. Out in the bay, away from the old man's hearing, Mr. Peterson crossed his arms and gave Jake a look that he'd seen before. "I know what you're thinking, and the answer is no. We can't afford to do charity work. This shop is barely breaking even as it is. But Mr. Peterson, his wife, everyone's got a sob story, Jake. You give this guy a free repair, word gets around, and suddenly everyone expects a discount. We're running a business here, not a nonprofit." Mr. Peterson's voice softened just slightly. "Look, I get it. You've got a good heart. But good hearts don't pay the rent on this place or your salary. Tell him we can't help him and send him on his way." Mr. Peterson walked back to his office, leaving Jake standing there in the middle of the garage, staring at the dying car with its hood still open like a cry for help. What Jake didn't know was that someone else had been listening to the whole conversation. In the corner of the waiting room, sitting with a magazine held up in front of his face, was a man in an expensive suit. He'd come in about an hour earlier with a sleek black luxury sedan for a routine oil change, and he'd been sitting there ever since, supposedly reading about celebrity gossip from 6 months ago. But his eyes hadn't moved across the pages in quite some time. The well-dressed man was in his mid-50s with silver streaks in his dark hair and the kind of watch that cost more than most people's cars. His name was Richard, though nobody in the shop knew that. They didn't know anything about him except that he drove a car that didn't belong in this neighborhood, and he was unusually patient about waiting. Richard had been watching the young mechanic all afternoon. He'd seen how carefully Jake worked, how he took the time to explain things to customers in terms they could understand. He'd noticed that Jake stayed late yesterday to finish an elderly woman's car even though his shift had ended. And now Richard was watching to see what Jake would do next. Back in the garage, Jake stood there for a long moment, wrestling with himself. He thought about his own grandfather, who'd died 5 years ago. Thought about how they couldn't afford the medication that might have helped him. Thought about how the system just ground people up when they didn't have money. He looked at his toolbox, then at the old sedan, then back toward the waiting room where the old man sat with his shoulders slumped in defeat. Jake had rent due in 10 days. He had maybe $300 in his bank account. The parts for this repair would cost him $200 out of his own pocket if he did what he was thinking about doing. Mr. Peterson might even fire him. But sometimes, Jake thought sometimes you just had to do the right thing, even when it cost you everything. He took a deep breath and walked back into the waiting room, where both the old man and the mysterious stranger in the expensive suit waited to see what kind of person he really was. Jake walked back into the waiting room and sat down across from the old man. The elderly gentleman looked up with hope and fear mixed together in his eyes, like he was bracing himself for bad news but still praying for a miracle. "Sir, I think I can help you," Jake said quietly, keeping his voice low so Mr. Peterson wouldn't hear from the back office. "I've got some parts in the back that should work. Used parts, but they're in good condition. I can get your car running for whatever you can afford to pay." The old man's eyes went wide. "Son, I appreciate the thought, but I can't let you do that. You'd be losing money. How much can you spare right now?" Jake asked. The old man pulled out his worn leather wallet and counted through the bills inside. His hands shook as he laid them out on the chair between them. "I've got $43. That's all I have until my check comes next week. I need $3 for gas to get to the hospital, so I can give you $40. $40 wouldn't even cover the cost of the water pump alone, let alone the other parts and the hours of labor this job would take." Jake did the math in his head quickly. He'd have to use new parts, not used ones. There weren't any used parts that would work. He'd have to pay for them himself, and that would leave him with about $100 to last until his own paycheck came. He'd be eating ramen noodles and peanut butter sandwiches for the next week and a half. $40 works, Jake said, extending his hand. "Deal." The old man gripped Jake's hand with both of his own, and tears started rolling down his weathered cheeks. "Thank you. You don't know what this means. My wife, Helen, she's everything to me. We've been married for 52 years. I can't lose her because of a broken-down car and an empty wallet." "You won't," Jake said firmly. "Give me a few hours. Why don't you rest here in the waiting room? There's a vending machine around the corner if you get hungry." Jake stood up and headed back to the garage, rolling up his sleeves. He didn't look at the man in the expensive suit sitting in the corner. He didn't notice how the stranger had lowered his magazine and was watching him with an expression that was hard to read. The work took longer than Jake expected. The water pump was seized up worse than he'd thought, and he had to be careful removing it without damaging the engine block. The timing belt was so worn that it nearly fell apart in his hands. When lunchtime came and went, Jake skipped his meal and kept working. His stomach growled, but he pushed through. Mr. Peterson came out twice to check on him. The first time he just grunted and walked away. The second time, around 4 in the afternoon, he stood there watching Jake work for a minute before speaking. "You're using new parts," Mr. Peterson said. It wasn't a question. "Yes, sir." "And what's he paying you?" Jake didn't look up from the engine. $40. Mr. Peterson was quiet for a long moment. "You know I'm going to have to dock your pay for those parts. Can't have inventory just disappearing." "I know. You're a fool, Jake. A good-hearted fool, but a fool nonetheless." Mr. Peterson walked away, shaking his head. By 6 in the evening, when the shop was supposed to close, Jake was still working. The other mechanic had already left for the day. Mr. Peterson locked up the office and left too, but he left the garage bay open for Jake to finish. The sun was getting lower in the sky, painting everything orange and gold. The old man had dozed off in the waiting room, his head tilted back against the wall, mouth slightly open. He looked exhausted, like he'd been carrying the weight of the world and finally put it down for just a moment. Jake finished installing the last component just as the sun was setting. He started the engine and it turned over smoothly, purring like it was 10 years younger. No smoke, no strange noises, no warning lights on the dashboard. He let it run for a few minutes to make sure everything was working properly, checking the temperature gauge and listening carefully for any problems. Satisfied, he turned off the engine and walked to the waiting room to wake the old man. But someone else had gotten there first. The man in the expensive suit was standing by the door, and Jake realized he was still there. His oil change had been done hours ago. "Your car's ready, sir," Jake said to the old man, gently touching his shoulder. The elderly gentleman woke with a start, confused for a moment about where he was. Then memory flooded back and he pushed himself up from the chair. "It's fixed? Really fixed? Good as new. Well, good as it can be anyway. You should make it to the hospital and back without any problems." They walked out to the garage together. Jake showed him the new parts he'd installed and explained what each one did. The old man listened carefully, nodding, though Jake could tell he didn't really understand the technical details. He was just grateful that someone had cared enough to help. "The $40, the old man said, pulling out his wallet again. "Right," Jake said, taking the two $20 bills. They felt heavy in his hand, heavier than paper should feel. This was probably grocery money, gas money, the buffer between this man and complete disaster. "You're all set. Drive safely, okay? And don't push the engine too hard. Keep it under 70 on the highway." The old man's voice cracked when he spoke. "How can I ever thank you properly? You've given me something I can't repay." "Just get your wife to that appointment safely," Jake said. "That's all the thanks I need. And tell her I hope the doctor has good news." "I will. I'll tell her about the angel who fixed our car." The old man shook Jake's hand one more time, holding on for an extra moment. Then he got into his car, started the engine, and listened to it run smooth and steady. He was crying again as he backed out of the parking lot and drove away into the twilight. Jake stood there in the garage doorway, watching the taillights disappear down the street. His back ached, his hands were raw and cut in a few places, and he was starving. He thought about the $100 he had left in his account, and the 10 days until payday. He thought about his landlord who didn't accept late payments and his nearly empty refrigerator at home. But mostly, he thought about the look on that old man's face. The relief, the gratitude, the hope that maybe things would be okay after all. "Worth it," Jake muttered to himself. "Excuse me," a voice said behind him. Jake turned around, startled. The man in the expensive suit was standing there in the garage. Up close, Jake could see he was older than he'd first appeared. Probably in his mid-50s with intelligent eyes and the kind of calm confidence that came from success. "Sorry, I didn't realize anyone was still here," Jake said. "Your car's been ready for hours. The keys are hanging on the board by the office." "I know," the man said. "I've been waiting." "Waiting for what?" The man smiled slightly. "Waiting to see what kind of person you really are." He pulled a business card from his pocket and held it out. "My name is Richard Chen. I'd like to talk to you about an opportunity if you have a few minutes." Jake took the card, confused. It was heavy stock paper, expensive, with embossed lettering that read Chen Industries, and listed Richard Chen as the founder and CEO. There was an address in the business district downtown, the kind of building with marble lobbies and security guards. "I don't understand," Jake said. "What kind of opportunity?" "The kind that doesn't come along very often," Richard said. "The kind that could change your life. But not here, not now. You're exhausted and this conversation deserves your full attention. Can you meet me tomorrow at 10 in the morning at this address?" He pointed to the card. Jake looked down at the card, then back up at Richard Chen. Nothing about this made sense. Why would a CEO be sitting in a rundown repair shop all afternoon? Why would he want to talk to a mechanic who'd just given away half his paycheck? "I work tomorrow," Jake said. "Not anymore. I spoke with Mr. Peterson. He's given you the day off." Now Jake was really confused, and maybe a little suspicious. "Why?" Richard Chen's smile widened. Come tomorrow and find out. I promise it'll be worth your time. He walked over to the keyboard, grabbed his keys, and headed toward his luxury sedan. At the door, he paused and looked back. What you did today for that man, that's rare. Rarer than you know. Sleep well, Jake. Tomorrow's going to be interesting. Then he was gone, driving away in his expensive car, leaving Jake standing alone in the garage with a business card in his hand and 100 questions in his head. Jake barely slept that night. He kept turning the business card over in his hands, reading the name again and again. Chen Industries. He'd heard of them vaguely. They were one of those big companies that made the news sometimes, but he'd never paid much attention. Why would a CEO of a major company care about a small-time mechanic? At 3 a.m, he finally grabbed his phone and searched for Chen Industries online. What he found made his stomach flip. The company was worth hundreds of millions of dollars. They had offices in 12 states. They dealt with manufacturing, logistics, distribution. Richard Chen himself had been featured in business magazines, described as a self-made success story who'd built an empire from nothing, and he wanted to meet with Jake, a mechanic who lived paycheck to paycheck in a tiny apartment with a leaky faucet. It had to be some kind of mistake, or maybe a scam. Rich people didn't just hand out opportunities to people like him. That wasn't how the world worked, but Mr. Peterson had confirmed it when Jake called him last night. Richard Chen had indeed spoken to him, and yes, Jake had the day off. Mr. Peterson had sounded confused about the whole thing too, but he'd agreed. By 9 a.m, Jake was standing in front of his closet, staring at his limited options. He didn't own a suit. He had one pair of khaki pants without stains, and a button-up shirt he wore to his cousin's wedding 2 years ago. It would have to do. He showered twice, scrubbing the permanent grease stains on his hands, though some of them never really came out. That was just part of being a mechanic. The address on the card led him downtown to a gleaming glass tower that seemed to touch the clouds. Jake stood outside for a full minute, watching important-looking people in expensive clothes walk in and out through the revolving doors. He felt like a fraud just standing there. Inside, the lobby was all marble and chrome, with a waterfall feature on one wall and security guards at a desk. Jake approached nervously, showing them the business card. One of the guards made a phone call, then handed Jake a visitor badge. 23rd floor. Miss Park will meet you at the elevator. The elevator was the fancy kind with mirrors and soft music. Jake watched the numbers climb and tried not to sweat through his shirt. When the doors opened on the 23rd floor, a woman in her 30s was waiting. She wore a professional suit and had a tablet in her hand. Jake, I'm Jennifer Park, Mr. Chen's executive assistant. He's expecting you. Please follow me. She led him down a hallway lined with windows overlooking the city. Jake had never been this high up in a building before. He could see the entire downtown area spread out below like a map. Jennifer walked quickly, her heels clicking on the polished floor, and Jake hurried to keep up. But instead of leading him to some massive corner office, Jennifer stopped at a regular conference room. Can I get you some coffee, water? Water's fine, thanks. She nodded and disappeared, leaving Jake alone in the conference room. He sat down in one of the leather chairs and immediately felt out of place. Everything in this room probably cost more than his car. Richard Chen walked in a few minutes later, dressed casually in slacks and a sweater. He looked more relaxed than he had yesterday at the shop, and he smiled warmly when he saw Jake. Thanks for coming, Richard said, shaking Jake's hand and sitting down across from him. I know this must seem strange. That's one word for it, Jake admitted. I'm honestly not sure why I'm here. Richard leaned back in his chair, studying Jake for a moment. Let me ask you something first. Yesterday, when you helped that old man, did you know I was watching? No, I didn't even know who you were until you gave me your card. And if you had known, would you have done anything differently? Jake thought about it honestly. No, I would have helped him either way. Richard nodded slowly, like Jake had just passed some kind of test. That's what I thought. That's what I needed to know. He stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city. 26 years ago, I was that old man. Not literally, but close enough. I was 29, fresh off the boat from Taiwan, trying to start a delivery business with one beat-up truck and dreams bigger than my budget. Jake listened, confused about where this was going. My truck broke down on the worst possible day. I had a delivery that would make or break my entire business. A contract that could lead to more contracts, or if I failed, I'd lose everything. I'd borrowed money from family, promised my wife we'd make it work. And there I was, stranded on the side of the road with smoke pouring out of my engine. Richard turned back to face Jake. A mechanic named Tommy stopped. He was young, maybe your age. He took one look at my truck and knew it was bad. I had $32 in my pocket. That was it. Everything else was tied up in that delivery. Tommy fixed my truck anyway. He worked for 3 hours in the hot sun, used parts I knew weren't cheap. And when I tried to give him my $32, he only took $20. He said I'd need the rest for gas. Jake felt a chill run down his spine. The story was too familiar. I made that delivery, Richard continued. Got the contract. That contract led to another, then another. Within 5 years, I had a fleet of trucks. Within 10, I'd expanded into warehousing and distribution. Everything I have now, everything you see, it all started because one mechanic showed kindness to a desperate stranger. That's an amazing story, Jake said quietly, but I still don't understand what it has to do with me. Richard sat back down. I looked for Tommy for years. I wanted to repay him, to thank him properly, to maybe give him a job or help him start his own business. By the time I finally tracked him down, he'd passed away. Heart attack 5 years ago. He died with almost nothing to his name, working in a shop not much different from where you work now. Jake's throat felt tight. I'm sorry. So am I. I was too late to help him. But I made myself a promise that day. I would watch for people like Tommy. People who do the right thing even when it costs them. People with character in a world that often rewards the opposite. Richard pulled out a folder and slid it across the table to Jake. I've been visiting that neighborhood for years, going to the same shop where Tommy worked, just watching, waiting to see if his spirit was still alive somewhere, and yesterday I found it. I found it in you. Jake opened the folder. Inside were documents, proposals, budget sheets with numbers that made his head spin. At the top was a title, Community Automotive Services Initiative. What is this? Jake asked. It's a program I want to launch. Nonprofit auto repair services for people who can't afford regular mechanics. Single mothers trying to get to work. Elderly people on fixed incomes. Veterans, students, anyone struggling. We'd charge based on what people can pay, and Chen Industries would cover the difference. Richard pointed to the papers. I've allocated $5 million to start. We need someone to run it. Someone who understands both cars and people. Someone with the right heart. Jake stared at the numbers, his mind racing. You want me to run this? I want you to build it from the ground up. Design the shop, hire the mechanics, create the policies. You'd have a team to help with the business side, but the vision would be yours. You'd be the director. I don't have any business experience. I barely finished community college. Tommy didn't have a business degree either, but he had something more important. He had integrity. He had compassion. Those things can't be taught in school. Richard leaned forward. I'm not offering you charity, Jake. I'm offering you a job that will be harder than anything you've done before. You'll work long hours. You'll face problems you've never dealt with, but you'll also help hundreds, maybe thousands of people who are exactly where that old man was yesterday. People who need someone to believe in them. Jake's hands were shaking as he held the papers. This was impossible. This didn't happen to people like him. Why me? You don't even know me. I know enough. I know you gave away money you couldn't afford to lose. I know you stayed late without extra pay. I know when your boss told you not to help that man, you helped him anyway. That tells me everything I need to know about who you are. Richard stood up. I'm not asking you to decide right now. Take the folder. Read through it. Think about it for a few days. But Jake, opportunities like this don't come around often. Tommy gave me a chance at a better life. I want to give you the same chance, and together, we can give that chance to countless others. Jake stood up too, clutching the folder like it might disappear if he let go. His whole body felt numb with shock. I need to ask. That old man yesterday, his wife, are they okay? Richard smiled. I had Jennifer check. He made it to the hospital on time. The doctors are optimistic. He walked Jake to the door. Go home, think about it. Call Jennifer when you're ready to talk. No pressure, no tricks. This is real and it's yours if you want it. Jake walked out of that building in a daze, the folder under his arm, his mind spinning with possibilities he'd never dared to imagine before. Jake sat in his apartment that night, the folder spread out across his tiny kitchen table. Pages and pages of plans, budgets, projections. The numbers swam in front of his eyes. $5 million. He'd never even held $1,000 in his hand at one time, and now someone was asking him to manage millions. He read through the proposal 3 times, trying to understand all the business language. The salary they were offering was triple what he made at the shop. Triple. That meant he could actually save money each month instead of scraping by. It meant he could afford to fix his car's broken air conditioning, maybe even move to a better apartment. But the money wasn't what kept him up that night. It was the weight of it all. What if he failed? What if he took this chance and let Richard down? What if he wasn't smart enough or good enough to pull this off? At 2 in the morning, he called his older brother, Danny. Danny lived 3 states away and worked as a teacher. He was the sensible one in the family, the one who always thought things through. "This is either the opportunity of a lifetime or a scam," Danny said after Jake explained everything. "Have you Googled this guy? Verified he's real?" "Yeah, he's real. Chen Industries is everywhere online. He's legitimate." "Then I don't see the problem. Why are you hesitating?" Jake was quiet for a moment. "Because people like me don't get chances like this. There has to be a catch. Maybe he just wants to feel good about himself, and when I mess up, he'll pull the plug and I'll be back to square one. Except worse, because I'll have quit my real job." "Or," Danny said slowly, "maybe he sees something in you that you don't see in yourself. Maybe you're better than you think you are, little brother." After they hung up, Jake still couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about that old man driving away in his fixed car, tears in his eyes. He thought about how many people were out there right now, stuck in the same situation, needing help they couldn't afford. The next morning, Jake went back to work at the shop. Mr. Peterson was in the office doing paperwork when Jake arrived. "Thought you might not come back," Mr. Peterson said, not looking up from his invoices. "Why would you think that?" "Because rich guys in fancy suits don't usually offer regular people anything good without expecting something back." Mr. Peterson finally looked at him. "What did he want?" Jake told him. About the program, the offer, the impossible decision he had to make. Mr. Peterson listened without interrupting, his face unreadable. When Jake finished, Mr. Peterson leaned back in his chair. "You know what your problem is, Jake? You're too good for this place. Always have been. You care too much. In this business, caring too much means you don't make money. I thought caring was a good thing. It is, just not always good for business." Mr. Peterson pulled open a drawer and took out an envelope. "I've been paying you less than you're worth for 4 years. I know it, you probably know it too, but you stayed because you're loyal and because you actually care about the customers, not just their wallets." He slid the envelope across the desk. "That's what I was going to dock from your pay for those parts you used. Keep it. Consider it my investment in whatever you decide to do next." Jake opened the envelope. There were $300 inside. "Mr. Peterson, I can't." "Yeah, you can. And Jake, if you're smart, you'll take that offer. Not because of the money, but because people like you, people who actually give a damn, those are the people who should be running things, not just guys like me who are counting pennies in a dying shop." Jake felt his eyes getting wet. He'd worked for Mr. Peterson for 4 years and never heard him talk like this. "Thank you. Don't thank me. Just don't screw it up. And if you need a reference, you've got one." That afternoon, something happened that made Jake's decision even harder. Around 3 o'clock, the old man from 2 days ago pulled into the shop. But this time he wasn't alone. A woman was with him, thin and frail, using a walker. That had to be Helen, his wife. They came into the shop slowly, the old man supporting his wife's elbow as she shuffled forward. When they saw Jake, both their faces lit up. "There he is," the old man said. "Helen, that's Jake, the young man I told you about." Helen's eyes were bright despite her obvious illness. She reached out and took Jake's hand in both of hers. Her grip was weak but warm. "My husband told me what you did. I wanted to come thank you myself before my next treatment." "How'd the appointment go?" Jake asked. "The doctor says I've got a fighting chance. They're starting a new treatment plan. It's going to be hard, but at least there's hope now." She squeezed his hand. "If we hadn't made that appointment, if our car had stayed broken down on the highway, I don't know what would have happened." "You didn't just fix a car, son. You might have saved my life." The old man handed Jake a small paper bag. "We wanted to give you this. It's not much, but it's what we can do." Inside the bag was a homemade pie, still warm, apple from the smell of it. "Helen made it this morning," the old man said proudly. She insisted even though she should be resting. "I wanted to," Helen said firmly. "Some things are more important than rest. like making sure kind people know they're appreciated. Jake held the pie carefully, his throat too tight to speak for a moment. Finally, he managed, "This is too much. You didn't have to do this." "Yes, we did," Helen said. "There's so much bad in this world. When you find good, you have to acknowledge it. You have to nurture it. Otherwise, it disappears and we end up in a world where nobody helps anybody." They stayed for a few more minutes, the old man checking under the hood of their car to show his wife all the work Jake had done. She nodded along, not understanding the mechanical details but understanding what it meant. Before they left, she hugged Jake and he could feel how fragile she was, how close she'd come to not being there at all. "Whatever you do in life," she whispered, "keep that good heart of yours. The world needs more people like you." After they drove away, Jake sat in the break room with the pie on the table in front of him. Mr. Peterson came in, saw his face, and didn't ask questions. He just poured 2 cups of coffee and sat down. "You're going to take that job, aren't you?" Mr. Peterson said. "I think I have to," Jake replied. "Not for me, but for people like them. How many Helens are out there who don't make it to their appointments because their car breaks down and they can't afford to fix it? How many people's lives fall apart because of a $400 repair bill? More than anyone wants to admit." That evening, Jake called the number on Jennifer Park's card. She answered on the second ring. "Jennifer, this is Jake, the mechanic. I've been thinking about Mr. Chen's offer. And I want to do it. I mean, I'm terrified and I have no idea what I'm doing, but I want to try. If Mr. Chen still thinks I'm the right person for this, then I'm in." There was a pause, then Jennifer's voice came back warm and professional. "I'm glad to hear that, Jake, really glad. Can you come in tomorrow morning? Mr. Chen will want to talk through next steps, and we'll need to start the onboarding process. There's a lot to do. I'll be there." After he hung up, Jake sat on his couch in his small apartment looking around at his life. The second-hand furniture, the walls that needed painting, the window that didn't quite close all the way. In a few weeks, he could probably afford a better place. But sitting there in that moment, he realized the apartment didn't matter. The money didn't even really matter. What mattered was that pie on his kitchen counter. What mattered was the look on Helen's face when she thanked him. What mattered was that somewhere out there, right now, someone's car was breaking down, and they were terrified because they couldn't afford to fix it. And soon, very soon, Jake was going to be able to help them. He cut himself a slice of Helen's apple pie. It was delicious, still warm from her oven, made with shaky hands by a woman who wanted to make sure kindness didn't go unnoticed. He ate slowly, savoring every bite, thinking about Tommy, the mechanic he'd never met but somehow understood completely. Tommy had helped Richard 26 years ago, never knowing what would come of it. Now Jake was getting a chance to honor that legacy, to keep the cycle going. He didn't know if he'd succeed. He didn't know if he was really qualified for this, but he knew one thing for certain. He was going to try with everything he had. For Helen and her husband, for Tommy's memory, for everyone out there who just needed someone to believe that they mattered, that their problems mattered, that they deserved help even when they couldn't pay for it. Tomorrow, his new life would begin. Tonight he finished his pie and allowed himself to hope. Jake arrived at Chen Industries headquarters the next morning with a mix of excitement and pure terror running through his veins. This time the building didn't seem quite as intimidating. Maybe because he knew what was waiting for him inside. Or maybe because he'd made his choice and there was no turning back now. Jennifer met him in the lobby with a genuine smile. "Welcome to your first day. Are you ready?" "Honestly? No, but I'm here anyway," she laughed. "That's the spirit." "Come on, Mr. Chen is waiting." But instead of going to the conference room, Jennifer led him to a different floor. When the elevator doors opened, Jake found himself in a large open space that looked like it was being renovated. There were blueprints spread across tables, sample materials stacked in corners. And in the middle of it all stood Richard Chen, wearing jeans and a work shirt, talking with a contractor. When Richard saw Jake, his face broke into a warm smile. "There he is. Come here. I want to show you something." Richard led Jake to a large table covered with architectural drawings. "This is going to be the first location for the Community Automotive Center. We've secured a property on the east side, near the neighborhoods that need it most. 3,000 square feet, 6 repair bays, a comfortable waiting area, and an office space for you and your team." Jake stared at the drawings, trying to process what he was seeing. "This is really happening." "This is really happening," Richard confirmed. "But I need your input on everything. You're the mechanic. You know what works and what doesn't. I don't want to build something that looks good on paper but doesn't function in reality." For the next 2 hours, they went through every detail. Jake found himself talking about things he'd never realized he'd noticed. The height of the lifts, the lighting needed for detailed work, the importance of a good ventilation system. He explained why the waiting area should have windows so customers could see their cars being worked on, building trust. He suggested a small play area for kids because single mothers shouldn't have to choose between getting their car fixed and finding childcare. Richard listened to everything, taking notes, asking questions. He treated Jake's opinions like they mattered, like they were valuable. It was a feeling Jake wasn't used to. "What about staffing?" Jake asked. "Who's going to work here?" "That's where you come in," Richard said. "I want you to hire the mechanics. Find people like yourself. People with skills and heart. People who understand that this isn't just about fixing cars." Over the next few weeks, Jake threw himself into the work. He interviewed dozens of mechanics looking for that spark, that quality he couldn't quite name but knew when he saw it. He found Carlos, a former military mechanic who'd been struggling to find work after coming home. He hired Lisa, a talented young woman who'd been told by too many shop owners that women didn't belong under hoods. He brought on David, an older mechanic who'd lost his own shop to rising rent but still had all the knowledge and skill of 40 years in the trade. Together, they designed the workflow, created the policies, figured out the pricing structure. They decided to charge on a sliding scale based on income. Nobody would be turned away for lack of money. But those who could pay would help subsidize those who couldn't. Jennifer helped Jake navigate the business side, teaching him about budgets and projections and operational costs. She was patient when he didn't understand something, never making him feel stupid for asking basic questions. "You're learning faster than you think," she told him one afternoon when he was frustrated with a spreadsheet. "Mr. Chen made the right choice with you." 6 weeks after that first meeting, the Community Automotive Center opened its doors. There was no big ceremony, no ribbon cutting. Richard insisted it should be low-key. "This isn't about us," he said. "It's about the people we're here to serve." The first customer was a young mother with 2 kids in the back seat of her struggling minivan. She looked exhausted and worried, explaining that she worked 2 jobs and couldn't afford to miss either one, but her transmission was slipping. Jake personally looked at her car. The transmission fluid was low and dirty, and there was a minor leak. Nothing catastrophic yet, but it would be soon if left unchecked. The repair would normally cost $400 or $500 at a regular shop. "What can you afford?" Jake asked her gently. She looked down at her hands. "Maybe $50? I know that's not enough. I just thought maybe you could tell me how long it'll last so I can plan." "We can fix it today for $50, Jake said. "And we'll show you how to check the fluid level yourself so you can keep an eye on it." The woman's eyes filled with tears. "Are you serious? I thought this place was too good to be true." "It's real," Jake assured her. "That's why we're here." By the end of the first week, they'd helped 23 people. By the end of the first month, word had spread and they were fully booked every day. Jake saw things that broke his heart and strengthened his resolve. He met a veteran who'd been sleeping in his car, needing just a battery replacement to get to a job interview. He helped a grandmother who was raising her grandkids and couldn't afford the brake job that kept her up at night with worry. He fixed the car of a college student who was about to drop out because he couldn't get to campus. Each person had a story. Each car represented someone's lifeline to work, to family, to survival. 3 months in, Richard stopped by to see how things were going. He walked through the shop, watching the mechanics work, chatting with customers in the waiting area. Jake saw him talking to an elderly couple, and something about the way Richard listened, really listened, reminded him why this whole thing existed. Later, in Jake's small office, Richard sat down with a satisfied expression. "You've exceeded every projection we had, but more importantly, you've created something real here, something that matters. I couldn't have done it without you believing in me," Jake said. Richard shook his head. "I just opened a door. You're the one who walked through it and built something beautiful on the other side." He paused, looking out at the shop floor. "I got a letter last week. Want to know who it was from?" "Who?" "Helen, the wife of the man whose car you fixed that day. She wanted me to know that she's in remission. The treatment is working. She said she thinks about you every day. about how a stranger's kindness gave her the chance to fight for her life. Jake felt his throat tighten. I just fixed a car. No, you did more than that. You showed someone they mattered. You proved that the world hasn't completely forgotten how to care. Richard stood up and looked at Jake seriously. 26 years ago, Tommy helped me. He never knew what came of it. He died thinking he was just a mechanic who never amounted to much. But his kindness created all of this. It rippled forward through time, touching hundreds of lives now. I wish I could have met him, Jake said quietly. In a way, you did. You're him. You're the next Tommy, keeping that spirit alive for the next generation. Richard extended his hand. Thank you, Jake, for saying yes, for taking the risk, for being exactly who I hoped you'd be. They shook hands, but then Richard pulled Jake into a brief hug. My father used to say that we're all just links in a chain. The past connects to the present, and the present shapes the future. You're an important link in a very valuable chain. After Richard left, Jake walked out onto the shop floor. Carlos was explaining a repair to a nervous customer, showing her exactly what was wrong and what they'd do to fix it. Lisa was under a car, her skills proving wrong everyone who'd ever doubted her. David was training a young apprentice, passing on decades of knowledge to someone who couldn't afford formal education. This was what success looked like. Not the building or the budget or the business plan. It was the single mother who could get to work tomorrow. It was the veteran who had a reliable car for his new job. It was every person who walked in afraid and left with hope. Jake thought about the moment he'd decided to help that old man despite his boss's warnings, despite his own financial struggles. He'd made that choice in a split second, never imagining where it would lead. One small act of kindness made without any expectation of reward had somehow transformed his entire life and given him the power to transform others' lives too. His phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. He opened it. This is Helen. My husband and I are making another pie. When can we drop it off? We want to see what you've built. Jake smiled and typed back. Anytime. The door is always open. He looked around his shop at the people working and waiting, at the cars being healed and the lives being helped. This wasn't just a job or even a career. This was a calling, a purpose, a way to make the world just a little bit better, one repair at a time. And it had all started with a simple choice to do the right thing, even when it cost him everything. Tommy would have been proud. Jake was finally beginning to be proud of himself too. The next customer pulled in and Jake grabbed his tools, ready to help. There was work to do, people to serve, kindness to spread. The chain continued, link by link, heart by heart, one broken down car at a time.